Good morning, everyone. For those of you that don't know, I'm Councillor Nigel Moxon. I'm the chair of the Place Select Committee, and I'd like to welcome you all here to Rushcliffe Borough Council's offices for this Place Select Committee meeting on the 12th of October 2022. So firstly, just to remind everyone that we're being broadcast live and it's being recorded and on YouTube for publication, and also a reminder to everyone to, when you speak, use your microphones in front of you. So first of all, the minutes of the last meeting, I'm sure you've all had a chance to read through them. Those of you who were here, is that a true record and can I sign them? All those in favour? Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, please may I just point out that I don't have a brother called Mark. It's only a little typo, but just for future reference. Thank you.
What page is that on?
Just on the list of attendees. Apparently there's a Mark in Trona. I'm not aware of any.
On my copy it says Mike, so it's already been corrected.
All right, brilliant. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you very much. Right, item number 2 on the agenda is membership of this select committee. This is to note the appointment of Councillor Stephen Garner to the select committee in place of Councillor Nigel Turner. Fortunately, it looks like Steve Garner's not here today. That was approved at the full council meeting on the 22nd of September. Item number 3, apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillor Hollis and Councillor Purdy Horan is substituting.
Thank you very much. Item number 4 is declarations of interest. Do any members or officers present have any disclosable pecuniary interest to declare? No. And do any members or officers present have any private interest, whether pecuniary or non-pecuniary, to declare? No. Okay. Right, next on the agenda is item number 4, which is the public transport and local bus overview. This morning we've got a presentation on this item from Derek Higton and Gary Wood. So I will hand it over to them to, I'm sorry, my apologies. And Councillor Neil Clark, who is the Cabinet Member for Transport. So I'll hand over to all 3 of you to do the presentation. I think you have to start tonight, Neil.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. And yes, as you say, I'm the Cabinet Member for Transport and Environment. And I've got a very strong team of minders with me today. So I've got Derek Higton, who's the Service Director for Place and Communities. I've got Gary Wood, who is the Group Manager for Highways. And that obviously includes bus services. And then I have Pete Matheson, who is the Team Manager. And he drills into the detail of bus services as well. So obviously that team will answer all the difficult questions. I will confine myself to the easy questions, Mr. Chairman. But just by way of introduction, just to start things off, and as you see the slide there, and we just to note that we do take delivery of some nice electric buses there at the top left-hand corner, and at the bottom right, just to show you the sort of infrastructure, Mansfield bus station, etc. And just an example, top right, a bus-only lane in Mansfield as well. So that gives you just a very brief thumbnail sketch overview of how much we do deliver bus services. If go on to the next slide, please. So and that illustrates really just how important public transport is to the County Council. You will see the Nottinghamshire Plan in particular, we do commit ourselves to delivering bus services to our communities, and we also commit a lot of money to that in our budget as well. So we spend a net of 30 million. There's more going into it than that 30 million, Chairman, because we get some extra grants from government, etc. So later on in the slides, when we drill into the detail, if people are trying to do mental arithmetic very quickly, they'll see that that spend actually comes to more than 30 million, but that's the net budget that we actually spend. And contrary to popular belief, it's very easy to complain and criticise about services, but actually Nottinghamshire is one of the top providers of public transport in the country, bearing in mind that there are counties that don't provide any public transport. So despite everything, we should still be proud of the services that we do commit ourselves to deliver, and that's both internal and external partners. As you can see, the third bullet point there, we handle special needs transport, we handle school transport, as well as then working with external partners as well, the likes of, for instance, Stagecoach, Trent Barton, CT4N, etc. So we have a lot of services that we do work with other partners. And just to bear in mind in our future discussion on this, Chairman, some of the services we are in control of, some of them where external partners deliver those, then we are not necessarily in control of those, but we are in a facilitating and encouraging mode rather than being in complete control of the services that the commercial operators operate. So that's really is part of that first bullet point. And also then, if you remember from that first slide, the infrastructure is vitally important. And then we are looking at ticketing initiatives, commissioning and concessions, etc., which is all very important. So really that's just a flavour of just demonstrating that we are committed to public transport despite our very challenging times, which I think we can all agree are coming upon us with budgetary challenges. It is going to be difficult to get that right balance, because I want to also illustrate to you, Chairman, that it's not just, if you like, in inverted commas, delivering public transport, but we need to be, wearing my environment hat as well, there's a good reason for getting people onto buses, is to get them out of the cars and to help save the environment and to help work towards our carbon targets of reducing that pollution as well. So on the one side, that's important, but we have to balance that with budgetary and financial challenges as well. So as you can imagine, like all these things, very difficult balance to achieve. With that, I'm now going to pass on to Gary Wood to drill into some more of the detail.
Thank you, Councillor Clark, for that really helpful introduction. So just in terms of making you aware of some of the different components of transport, we're going to take you on a journey, if you like, around that circle as part of the presentation. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the why we do things and the how as well, and also just think about the operational context that we're in at the moment. Before then, I hand over to Pete to go through some of the detail of the individual functions. And so if you look at that circle, you'll see there are lots of components, whether we're talking about our school transport activity, where we transport around 11,000 pupils per day, right through to the activity that Councillor Clark mentioned earlier around our bus stations, where pre-COVID we were looking at somewhere around 3 million passengers per year using those facilities. So there's quite a lot going on in transport, and I'm sure as we go through, the committee will decide, you know, which particular aspects of it that it wants to consider in more detail. So then, if we think about the why, really absolutely essential that we link in with our plans. And if you look at the local transport plan extracts there at the bottom, and key words about a reliable and resilient network, and making sure that we have public transport that supports the economy and supports growth, and is sustainable and supports healthy travel as well. But obviously, it's really important for getting people to work as well, and in their leisure activities. And also, we need to remember, for some people, it might well actually be their only means of transport if they don't have a car. And connected with that as well, I think it's really important that sometimes people with their only form of transport, being the bus, they can end up with all sorts of issues around loneliness and social isolation if those transport facilities aren't available. So that's a little bit around the why. Obviously, as well, if we start to delve into legislation, there are various acts of parliament that give us various duties around public transport as well, and we'll touch on some of those later as we go through. So just thinking a little bit about the how, because we thought it was useful to do this before we go into each individual area. Councillor Clark mentioned earlier, we have got strong partnerships with the bus operators, that we don't tell them what to do. They're their own entities, they're commercial entities largely. But what we do have through a recent initiative is what's called enhanced partnerships. So through COVID, we worked really closely with the bus companies to make sure that all of the network kept running. And off the back of that, government persuaded us to enter into enhanced partnerships. So that's working really well. And again, we'll give you a bit more detail on that in the future. Thinking as well of the other partnerships, so strong working relationships with the districts, strong working relationships with the local transport authorities, including Nottingham City, good working relationships, obviously, with via East Midlands, our wholly owned company. They help us with delivery of infrastructure, bus lanes and bus stop clearways. And then, really important, we don't do this on our own in terms of the professional networks. So there's a slide that shows how the county council at the middle links in with all of these different organisations and shares information and gathers knowledge and expertise, and works closely with people like the Department for Transport, obviously, but other organisations such as the Midlands Highways Alliance, where we share and swap information with other transport authorities, but also we work with the universities and we work with local businesses and the chamber and organisation like North Notts Bid to get the best of their knowledge and their understanding and their aspects and weave that into our work. So the last couple of points on the previous slide would just that, again, we do this with working very closely with councillors and local members, and we spend a lot of time listening to residents. Quite often that can be through parish councils, or it can be through feedback and surveys that we do to understand what the needs and demands are of residents. But just thinking about the current operational context, there are, I guess, with every topic that you might look at, a number of challenges and opportunities. So at the moment, you'll be fully aware of the inflationary impacts that are starting to hit. So they're in the bus world as well. They're impacting on the commercial operators. The other issue that they're facing at the moment, although they seem to be starting to get on top of that, is recruitment of drivers, and so some service reliability has suffered because of that. Government has supported the transport sector all the way through COVID and has continued, if you like, through the other side, and that's starting to taper off. And our understanding is that will come to an end at the end of April. So that's a real challenge for us going forward as to looking at which routes we support that might not be commercial in the future, don't have those patronage levels, because that's another challenge there. The patronage levels aren't what they were pre-COVID because of people's changes in the way they live, the way they shop. I suppose the other challenge is there's quite often a misconception with members of the public that the county council sort of controls or runs all of this and funds it all. And as you probably realise, that's not the case. Just thinking more positively then, thinking about the opportunities, what we have been successful in getting from government is around £18 million worth of bus service improvement plan. That's the BSIP, bus service improvement plan funding. And there's many strands of that improvement activity, and we'll touch on those later. We're also embarking on a bus network review to look at which routes we'll be able to support in the future with the financial envelope that we've got at that point. And really importantly is the work that we've done on demand responsive transport. And again, we'll touch on that a little bit more in the future, because that's new and it's innovative, it's good, but and it will be part of the solution, I think, after April 23. The last few points there are really just thinking about how we are ambitious in the future and bidding for funding. So we understand that the government are going to put another funding round for low emission vehicles at some stage, and we'll be right there trying to get that money as well. And we're really keen as well to do a sales campaign to get people back on our buses, but we need to time that so that it's when the bus service is a bit more reliable than it is at the moment with that driver shortage. So having sort of just given you a bit of a background of the sort of what, how, why, and the operational context, we'll now take you on hopefully a relatively short and smooth journey around that circle with the different topics. I'll hand over to Pete Matheson.
Thank you very much, Gary. So as Gary said, I'll just take you around those little circles on the outside of transport to show how we deliver services, how they're interdependent, as well as how we integrate them to maximise efficiencies and provide some good services for members of the public. So firstly, we just talk about our sort of statutory duties around mainstream school transport and special educational needs transport. We have an obligation, and since the 1944 Transport Act, subsequent acts, to provide free travel for those that are entitled to it, and we have various statutory requirements to do that. We have it based around age and distance is the predominant one for the statutory. We have also a low income element which extends that, but similarly done in around distance, but the age groups are slightly different. And then we have a number of discretionary schemes as well within that, related to sort of faith schools. That's a similar type of criteria going towards your nearest faith school, but it's based on age and distance as well, as to whether you get free travel on that. We also have another discretionary element of it, where we take into account catchment areas as well as what's the nearest school. So we have a number of these that we've decided to do on top of what the statutory minimum is. Within this sort of transport as well, and the vulnerable young people that we travel, we initiate and commission short breaks, usually through specialist providers. Similarly, we do provide for those children that are educated other than at school, which unfortunately is increasing, and maybe part of that's a legacy of COVID as well. That's taking transport to alternative provision and providers to ensure they can continue with the curriculum, but maybe in a different setting to a traditional setting. We also have policies around looked after children as well, and providing transport for them where appropriate. And as Gary said, we transport between 10 and 11,000 students on mainstream transport, which we tend to call sort of traditional bus, and that's split between about 5,000 statutory and 5,000 non-statutory. And then we also transport 1,500 SEND people as well to various specialist schools, but also into mainstream schools where they have provision that's suitable for that particular child. As you can see, this is a significant amount of the budget is around this. Combined together between mainstream and SEND is about 15 million. And as Gary sort of touched on, there is particular challenges in this area, trying to sort of contain costs, which is difficult at the moment. How can we increase income? That's very, very difficult at the moment, and make sure we can provide safe and reliable services. And we've also got some problems with placement of pupils as well. There isn't enough capacity at schools, so we're having to take children to other schools, which is putting pressure on the budgets as well. and especially around special transport, we've also got the issues around getting escorts and stuff to help with those SEND pupils as well. Moving on to another strand of the provision of transport, we've got a very successful independent travel training campaign where we try to develop the skills of young people and adults to travel independently, whether that's to school, apprenticeships, and preparing them for work in the future. We've managed to embed that into 8 special schools and 20 mainstream schools, and we have a high participation in that. We've had over 180 students successfully trained and about 400 per year participating in that scheme. This is where we go along to school, and it's rather than one-to-one, it's one-to-many. So we get somebody to be empowered within the school to deliver that programme, but we help and complement that with our own little set of team locally. It's been recognised that we're one at the forefront of this particular provision. Other authorities such as Oxfordshire and other areas, Buckinghamshire, come to us to sort of ask how we've done it. I'm very keen to sort of implement that going forward. And we've won an Adept Award recently for our scheme. So particularly proud of that, and we think that complements that programme, that traditional transport I spoke about on the last slide. Moving on to the next slide. So County Council has quite a large fleet, as you're seeing. We've got some my fleet manager down there, Andy, not my fleet manager, fleet manager down there, Andy Frog, in front of a few of the different types of buses that we provide. So we provide over 49 runs to our daycare services, which is the predominant amount of the work that we do with those vehicles. We make sure they're integrated as much as possible. So when they've delivered their cohort to the adult social care, they then go off and do some local bus runs. So we integrate that local bus provision off peak. So we've got 24 routes that are integrated into those to utilise the vehicles in a very effective way. We also use those vehicles as well to provide some SEN transport as well, because there's not always providers out there to be able to do certain runs. We have 65 vehicles in all, which is a challenge, obviously, to maintain and replace. We've also, through successful bids to the government, we've diversified parts of those fleet as well in those local bus one. We have 6 electric buses that we've purchased through successful bids to government. We run off 4 of those ourselves, and we've under licensed 2 of those by Stagecoach. Obviously, this is somewhere we'd like to be to meet the government's aspirations around climate change and our own plans for carbon neutral, and we have about 80 drivers to manage. As we talked about, it's obviously a challenge delivering those services in the current environment with drivers. There's been some issues, as there has been in the commercial sector as well, but we're doing our utmost to make sure we deliver those services for people, because they are a vital link, as Gary talked about earlier on. We have a budget of about 4 million, but that's 0.5 million net of income. We have a sort of service level agreement between the departments to do that. Moving on to sort of local bus support, as we said, some of those are provided by us, by our fleet, but we also go out and we commission a number of them. We're obliged by law to consider any gaps that's in the bus network and consider putting public transport options in. However, it's not a requirement that we do that. And that's changing. So there is a talk of it being not just for socially necessary services, but potentially economically necessary services going forward. We wait for further guidance on that. And we have a different framework to work with the operators, which is enhanced partnerships, which we've signed up to. We've got another variation of that going through at the moment in discussions with the government, which has levied in significant funding, which Gary talked about as part of the bus service improvement plan. We obviously do a lot of this in liaison with operators. We meet regularly with them so they can highlight any issues that's on the network, and then we can, in good time, consider options for going forward with that. We work very closely when we do implement changes on consulting as appropriate, and we work very closely with the boroughs, districts and parishes in developing those proposals and then going out and delivering them, and hopefully then promoting them as well, because we want them to be as sustainable as possible. At the moment, we've got over 80 routes supported with that about £4.1 million budget. Pre-COVID, we had about 1.8 million journeys travelling on those services, slightly less now. As Gary talked about, it's a challenging environment for not only ourselves, but for the commercial operators, with only about 75 to 85% passengers have returned. Importantly, going forward, we were successful in bidding for rural mobility funding, which gave us 3 demand responsive pilots, which we've just implemented. And this is an important and very different to what we do now. This is fully on demand. There's no fixed element to it, and that people can book either by their mobile phone, or they can phone up on a traditional line and book their transport. And then they're given a solution to going forward, particularly appropriate in areas of where there's low density, low usage off peak, and to complement the existing commercial network, so linking them in so they get fast journey times. So that's where we would use demand responsive transport. We produced a small video to sort of show how that works for the customer. This is part of our promotional activity to get people to change the way that they travel now, and I will just play that now.
Will it work, Pete?
And hopefully, fingers crossed. We tried to do a run through, but
We're getting there.
we're getting there. Wonders of technology.
I need to click all in that button. Maybe. Double click it. Yep. Maximize the screen. Stop it for a sec. You know what the sound on. Got the sound. It's in there. Yeah. No, it wasn't. You have to stop sharing to begin with. Yeah. Enjoy that.
That's it. Yes, that's it.
We're nearly there. We're nearly there. It's like the bus is slightly delayed. Go back to the start, Pete. Go back to the start. Yeah, take it back to the start. Yeah. Use the slider. Yeah, need that volume. That's it. Go on, hit it. You need to switch it on there for the sound.
Where's the sound?
There, we just turned it off.
That was accidental trying to get to. That's it. Done it now.
Yeah.
I think so.
Press play. So slide it back to the start using the red decliner.
Notts Bus On Demand is a flexible on-demand bus service brought to you by Nottinghamshire County Council. With Notts Bus On Demand, you can choose the time you would like to travel via an easy-to-use app. You don't need to check a timetable. When you're ready to travel, simply book the bus to pick you up from a bus stop or designated point that is convenient for you. Notts Bus On Demand doesn't have a fixed route. It can travel anywhere between bus stops and designated points within the operating zone, where there is not already a scheduled bus service running. Whether you're travelling for work or play, Notts Bus On Demand offers a flexible way for you to reach your destination, taking you where you want, when you want. Booking a journey with Notts Bus On Demand is easy. Download the Notts Bus On Demand app from your smartphone's app store and click Get Started to register your details. You'll also be asked to choose whether you want to pay for your journeys with a debit or credit card via the app, with cash, or a concessionary pass when you get on the bus. If you have a concessionary pass, you can add this to your user profile in the app and then select Pay On Board /concessionary pass as your payment method. You can change these details or add a new payment method in the app at any time. When you're ready to book a journey, simply open the app and select your pickup and drop-off points. You'll also be asked to confirm the number of passengers who will be travelling. Our clever app will give you an estimated time for the next available bus. Or if you would prefer to book a journey for the next day, you can click on the schedule button to make an advance booking. To confirm a journey, simply click Book this journey. Then, when it's time, make your way to your pickup point and wait for one of our friendly drivers to arrive to take you to your destination. You can even track the progress of your bus via the app. And if you're travelling further afield, you can use Knott's Bus On Demand to connect to other public transport. If all our buses are busy and you cannot book a journey, wait a few minutes and check again. Our app is run in real time, so as soon as the next bus is available, it will show in the app. If you no longer need to make a journey that you have booked, this can be cancelled in the app, freeing up a seat for someone else. Like all our buses, Knott's Bus On Demand is fully accessible, with low floors and ramp access for wheelchair users, pushchairs, and people with mobility difficulties. You can enjoy your journey knowing you are helping the planet too, because these buses will only be travelling when they are needed. To find out more about Knott's Bus On Demand, check out our website, www.nottinghamshire.gov.uk/Knott's Bus On Demand.
Just while Pete brings the presentation back up, if you watch that again, Robin Hood makes an appearance 3 times in that little video. So your challenge is to find Robin Hood 3 times. Just play.
So obviously this is a very important part of us looking at how we should invest in bus services going forward. The technology is now caught up. There has been trials in this before, so I think we're in a good position to use this to inform future investment over the coming years. During this particularly difficult time, we've also obviously brought in some temporary support up to April next year to support some further bus routes, along with the government support over the next 6 months. And what we're going to do is we're going to review the support not only for those, but our core report, those 80 routes, over the coming months, and take into account what demand responsive transport could do and be a part of that solution going forward, and come up with a new plan moving forward. So the important thing over the next few months is obviously, once we've got a stable business environment. At the moment, the challenges of making buses a little bit unreliable, as I'm sure some of you maybe have heard from some of your residents, but that is improving. And then we'll go out and do a good communication and sales campaign to promote not only the commercial network, but our own network as well, because a thriving commercial network reduces the need for us maybe to intervene as well. So we need to work hand in glove with the bus operators over the coming months to promote public transport. And obviously, as Kerry sort of alluded to, this sort of 3-year plan that we're going to have, we've got some other further funding to help us as well, potentially. So fingers crossed the government will approve that bus service improvement plan funding. And there's a potentially sort of 3.9 million that could be used for investment in bus services as well for that. So we're nearly there. So don't worry, I've done quite a few now. We've got to about halfway through. We just got some of the infrastructure bits to talk. So hopefully in another 5 or 10 minutes or so. Important part of any public transport experience is having good, safe and clean places to board the bus. So and to enable people to interchange between bus services as well. So the County Council's had a continual series of investments since 2007 in four new bus stations. We have over 400,000 departures going through their bus stations, and about 2.8 million passenger journeys travel through them pre-COVID. A little bit less at the moment, but we're hoping we'll get back up to those levels in the next year or 2 years. We also look after some on-street interchanges where there isn't necessarily money to invest in a bus station, so we have those in a number of locations across the county where we've got enhanced services, where we know people interchange between services. We look after nearly 6,000 bus stops, including 1,800-ish bus shelters and 600 clear channel shelters, which are provided commercially, and they maintain and look after those on our behalf. We also have been, we're at the forefront of information. We've been we're the top rural authority for providing real-time information at stops and on increasingly so on mobile. We're hoping to, obviously, with BSIP funding, enhance that and enhance the information we give to people, and have every single service have real time, so people know when their bus is coming, give them that reassurance, or utilise their time to buy a coffee while they wait for their bus, and support the local economy. Also very important, you know, the top priority of people using the bus is reliability and punctuality. So we have a number of bus lanes, traffic regulation orders and bus stop clearways to enable the buses to travel speedily from A to B and make it an attractive proposition for current users as well as future users. And we're using smart technology on traffic light priority as well to enable the buses to keep on time. Also, another important element of that is just a traditional sort of timetable production. So we still produce a lot of information at stop. We also are responsible for data for operators to make sure people can use it for journey planning or for real-time information. So it's robust and works. You know, there's a budget of 1.8 million, about 0.57 net of income, because these bus stations, when we delivered them, we worked very closely with all the districts, and they make a contribution towards the maintenance of those bus stations, which is very welcome, and they're very bought into them. As well as we look at other opportunities, obviously, within those to increase income as well. And the bus operators pay departure charges, so hence why that figure's a lot lower than what the actual budget is. Moving on to concessions and ticketing, we have a statutory obligation to obviously provide ticketing for elderly and disabled. We also have a discretionary element regarding tram travel and companions passes. And we currently have about 153,000 concessionary pass holders, about 10,000 disabled pass holders, and 3,500 of those have companions. For those people who have difficulty getting onto public transport, enables them to bring somebody along with them to help them through that journey to where they want to go. We're very, very keen to obviously introduce people to public transport. So we're within those bus service improvement plans. We're looking at introducing multi-operator ticketing, not multi-operator ticketing. Just noticed that spelling typo there. So this is to make sure that if people changing between two buses, they're not financially penalised for that. It actually makes that journey financially viable and increases their travel opportunities. So they can get from A to B quicker. And we're also exploring an under 22 scheme. And we're also looking to be part of the government's job seeker scheme, where we enable bus passes for people to attend interviews and to help them out when they first start work, because it can be quite a big upfront sum to start off with. We have a budget currently, as you can see, it's another huge chunk of £11 million that goes towards that. But you know, there is we're moving with government on this to be one of the first ones to make this digital. So we're looking to do some further improvements as to the way it is. We've got our own internals much more online now, but we're also looking to go where it's on your mobile phone rather than traditional smart card. Back to me after this. I'll do it. So moving on to the partnerships, which I just touched on earlier on, we approved a partnership in April this year, and it's been revised in October following the indicative funding allocation that we've got for that BSIP funding, which Gary talked about. So that's sort of 18 million for Nottinghamshire, and then we've worked with the city, and there's a further 13 million mixed between capital and revenue. We also, within that framework, that gives us a good foundation working with all the local authorities around us, because everything we had to do had to take into account of what was happening cross border, because buses don't just stop at borders, they cross over into Derbyshire, they cross over into Leicestershire. So we work very closely with those. So we've got our devolution proposals, so we're just developing those along with the other authorities as we move forward on that journey. Other important elements of this is obviously working around local transport plan and how we invest in that, and also levering in as many developer contributions as possible, working with the district councils to mitigate the impact of development, but to enhance the bus network and improve the bus network at the same time. And we'll be very much taking that into account, that funding, when we're looking at this bus network review and how that can be utilised in the most effective way. And the budgets, as Gary said, varies from year to year depending on when these developments come on stream, roughly around 400 to 600k.
Thanks, Pete. When we're putting this presentation together, we asked the team and the teams involved to just look at the interdependencies, because these things don't operate in silos. So without describing all of the arrows, there's lots and lots of connections across those different functions. We thought we'd just finish off with a little bit of a description about how we compare, and then just think what we've got on the stocks for the next 12 months. So, as I mentioned earlier, we're actually in the top 2 of county councils in terms of public satisfaction. I don't think we're much different to anybody else in terms of patronage, and that is a challenge at the moment, because that's what's having an impact on the commercial viability. We're really well placed currently in terms of accessibility. 64% of residents have got a bus service within a few hundred metres of them. Neutrality we've already mentioned, and the spend levels there around how much is spent on local bus. So some authorities don't spend anything on local bus. So Derby City, for instance, don't put any money into local bus, but Derbyshire do and Leicester should do, and the numbers there. And I think across the country we're certainly in the top quartile for that. And then thinking about the work of the team over the next 12 months. So we've got all the business as usual activity that has been described around school transport and running things as normal, but we've got those opportunities and challenges as well to tackle. Part of that equation will be the national bus strategy monies that we've talked about, that need to do that network review, building on the demand responsive travel, that new way of operating. So people using an app to book a bus, it's slightly new territory. It's working out really well, the trial. And then the sales that we've mentioned. As we mentioned earlier, we're really keen to try and tap into any money that's available, linking with the city around what they're doing on their Transforming Cities bid work, and as Pete mentioned, making the best of new technology. So hopefully that presentation has given you a little bit of a whistle-stop tour of what we do, why we do it, how we do it, and what the current context is. So at that point, Chairman, I'll hand back to you from the team.
Thank you very much for that, Gary. It was a very comprehensive presentation that you have given us this morning on what could be a bit of a dry subject of buses. So, and I'm glad we eventually got to see that the video as well. So I'd like to open it up now for questions from the committee. First one I've got Councillor Upton.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for a great presentation on bus services. But I look at the title, Public Transport and the Local Bus Review. I would suggest that it's a bus review. I hear nothing about or see nothing about trains and trams and perhaps cycle routes. So perhaps in the workload on the next agenda item, could we look at trains, trams and cycle routes? So if it's a bus review, then great. I've got a couple of questions. The walking criteria to school, is it 3 miles still from my childhood, or has it changed?
So yeah, it's over 8 is 3 miles and under 8 is 2 miles. And then if you're on low income, it changes to under 11 for 2 miles. And if it's over 11, one of your 3 nearest schools, and that's 2 to 6 miles.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Wheeler.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think, again, thank you for the presentation, quite informative. I think for me, the key thing is around getting some more feedback from the on-demand service. I know it's only just started, because the money I think we put into some of these bus routes were subsidised just because we get big outcry. 3 people in a community use a bus service and 10,000 sign a petition wanted it to stay. The amount of money we put into that, we should be looking at where we can on demand in some of these routes, because from my understanding, we spend hundreds of thousands of pounds on some of these routes where probably per person, probably, well, error message going off there already, but yeah, spending hundreds of thousands of pounds on some routes and probably subsidising to hundreds of pounds for some people to use a bus, which can't be the model going forwards. Obviously, want to have a method for people to use the bus going forwards. Again, the on-demand is, to me, looks really good to that to do. But I think it'd be really interesting for that at the next meeting. Once more time, we can't obviously review it yet. It's only just started. It makes no sense to at this point. But yeah, a few months down the line, we've got some good quality enough data to look at and see where that could be expanded to. Something we should really be looking at. Thank you.
Councillor Cart.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to comment on actually both those questions, Councillor Upton's question, we concentrated on public transport in terms of buses because we weren't really sure what the scrutiny committee wanted to look at. There was no specific question. It was just give us a presentation about public transport. So these sorts of questions can be drilled into, and we can maybe look at something in a future meeting to get into more specifics. And I think Councillor Wheeler's sort of answered his own question to a certain extent. It is very early days on the NOTS bus on demand, but the very initial feedback is it's going extremely well. But obviously, we've got to have a full picture to check to see what the results are. But and he made mention of people demanding a particular service, and hopefully this on-demand service will be able to fulfil those demands in a more efficient way, as that little video did indicate. By definition, that bus is always going to have a passenger, at least one, if not several passengers on it, and be used, rather than an empty bus being seen travelling around the countryside, which is never good. And it's going to be a way to get to those hard to reach communities much easier. So fingers crossed, in time, hopefully, and this is certainly what I really do hope, is that it will show success that can be then expanded out across the county, assuming that it is successful.
Thank you very much for that. I've got Councillor Introna next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen, for the presentation. I've got one question and one observation with regard to the on-demand service. The first one is a question around the concessionary system. So I do recognise that we've got a number of financial challenges, as does everybody else in the UK, globally, etc. However, locally, there are challenges with respect to operators changing services. And sometimes these disproportionately impact our elderly community and those with mobility issues, as they often find it difficult to adapt to the change or seek alternatives. Is there any opportunity to review the concessionary passes to understand the cost impact of passes being available for use over the full 24-hour period? By and large, the majority of these groups seem to just elect to not travel rather than pay for a journey. And that's certainly based on evidence from the discussions that I've had over the last few months with my residents. And so I do wonder if it would have a significant material financial impact. I do appreciate that if there was to be a significant impact, then with a budget of 11.25 million, then clearly the absolute impact is larger. But is there any opportunity to look at this? Because if residents are just not making the journeys, then you know, I'm not sure that the impact would be that great. But certainly where we see things like the 9:30 till 11 service, I've certainly got residents in one part of my community where a bus has been moved from a 9:40 slot. Their only opportunity is to catch one much later in the day, and it just makes it much more difficult, even if it was just an amendment to maybe even 8 o'clock in the morning or something like that. Is it something that we can look at, please?
Thanks for your question, Councillor Introna. It certainly is something we can look at, and it is a challenge. We do quite often get asked whether concessionary users can use the bus in those peak times, which would be possible if there was adequate funding to cover all of that. The issue sometimes that is sort of forgotten is that if the bus is full and you need then another bus and another driver, the cost ramps up really quickly. But I think part of your question was reflecting through the period of some service unreliability at the moment, whether there's any opportunities to consider flexing the scheme. So that's something that we can definitely take away and raise with the operator. I'm not sure that it's something that we can mandate to the operators, but we can certainly talk to them about it and of course with Councillor Clark's permission to do so.
Okay, thank you. And secondly, just on Knott's Bus On Demand service, I just want to say thank you for this pilot scheme on behalf of the community in and around Retford. And the scheme itself operates where services have been lost, but certainly after a request from me on behalf of residents, the service area was amended in its initial weeks to include some residential areas on the periphery of Retford, which demonstrated some of those core values that you've described earlier, such as listening and engagement, and importantly, flexibility. From my point of view and my residents' point of view, it's a super initiative, and thank you so much.
Thanks, Chairman, and thanks for that response to those comments. Just using the opportunity to expand out, it's not just promoting the Knott's Bus On Demand service, which, touch wood, it will be absolutely brilliant and successful, but also I was insistent that we instigate a specific sales campaign for all the bus services, as well as Knott's Bus On Demand, for the sort of the linked two reasons. A, we want to promote the bus services and get people using the buses anyway, but then secondly, from that environmental impact, getting them out of the cars, reducing pollution, saving the environment, etc. But principally, people are always saying, why haven't we got a bus service here, there, or wherever? We need to be getting people to actually use those buses and get on the buses so that they can be seen, because obviously buses going around empty don't help anybody. So we need to be ensuring that we are really promoting that. And it's not a question of, I made quite clear, it's not issuing press releases from the council. It's actually having a specific sales campaign. So I've charged the team to work with the comms team and make sure we do sell the services, whether it's our commercial operators or our own services. We've really got to push getting people to get on the buses, because if they don't, then obviously they're going to be under threat, because if nobody's on it, it's difficult to justify keeping using it, especially in these budgetary constraints.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Gowland next.
Quite a few questions. Actually, my first one picks up on immediately what you've just been saying, Councillor Clark, because I completely agree with you. And I remember you saying that at the last full council about use it or lose it. So can we have more detail on that? Because I did also hear that you weren't going to start that sales campaign until the reliability of the service had been improved. And I can see that, but it's a sort of, 6, 1 half dozen other, because if reliability is not improved, there's no money to pay the drivers. And so, we get into a worse situation. So can we have more detail on what's actually happening? Because I think you're right, it's vital. Can you give us more details about how looked after children are specifically helped, what that means for them? What do the links between this authority and the local councils mean? So you've talked about it, but what happens between the councils, the borough councils and the other councils, particularly for promoting buses? On concessionary fares, has it been considered to instigate half fare passes for NHS or care workers? This isn't to say although they are, the NHS staff are angels. It's just that they're extremely large employers using extremely well-used bus routes, which can support additional bus routes coming in. Now, I appreciate the biggest NHS employer here is in the city, but people going there will be travelling from the county. And if we could get people onto those buses, it would solve a lot of problems at the Queen's and presumably other hospitals locally with parking. And this would also maybe address some of the issues that are raised about other concessionary fares, if alternative models for concessionary passes could be considered. I understand the costs, but presumably some of those costs can be shared with the bus services, because the bus companies, because presumably they could make a profit from this if it actually drove people to the buses. Our hands are tied by the deregulation model. What are we doing? And I understand about D2N2 and the future possibilities, but what are we doing to lobby this? Because if it's good enough for London, it's good enough for us. And finally, our hands are tied by budgetary challenges. And what are we doing to lobby central government on the risks to public spending in this area in the future? Thank you.
Chairman, if I just start off answering a couple of those, and then I'll ask Gary and Pete to answer some of the more detailed ones about concessionary and deregs. In terms of the reliability, yes, I think we all agree. You're quite right. There's nothing worse than having a schedule of a bus service and then the bus doesn't turn up. It's very frustrating, and I'm sure we can all recount examples of that happening. And so that's one of the things in the bus review we need to look at. If there is a very regular service, I'll just take as an example, if there's a service every 15 minutes or every half an hour, is it better to reduce that frequency, but to then ensure that that bus always turns up? Because I think across the whole industry and across the whole country, there are issues about shortage of drivers, etc., apart from any other technical reasons. So perhaps that certainty is better to be delivered if there is a slightly reduced frequency. That's one point to consider in the review. In terms of lobbying government, was it 2 weeks ago, I wrote to the Secretary of State requesting a meeting to talk about increasing the support from government on bus services, and also engaging with the local MPs to lobby on our behalf as well. So that lobbying our government is already underway, and is something that will be certainly escalating and up in the ante, because for the reasons I've stated previously, we've really got to get a sales campaign supported by government as well to ensure that we do get people using the buses more. If I could just ask Gary and Pete to answer the more technical questions.
Thanks, Councillor Clark, and thanks, Councillor Gowan, for your questions. I think I managed to write down most of them. So I think the first one was about details of the sales campaign. So we're still working that up, in all honesty. So we're quite happy to share that with you either at the next meeting or outside of the meeting. In terms of looked after children, I think it'd probably be appropriate for us to come back to you on that, because I've not got the policy in front of me, but I know that those children are treated more favourably in their transport needs. And on concessionary fares, I think, and again, this might be something for Councillor Moxon, but there seems to be a lot of questions around concessionary fares, and I wonder whether that's something that the committee might want a separate session where we can explain it in more detail, because it is quite complicated in terms of how the money works, what's happened through COVID in terms of how much we've been paying the operators, and actually what room for manoeuvre we have, and what requires us to work together in partnership with the operators. So I just wonder if there's any merit in perhaps looking at concessionary fares in a little bit more detail, perhaps. And then I think you asked a question around deregulation and devolution. In the draft scheme as it stands, there's a proposition in there that the mayor and or the combined authority in combination would have the power of being able to introduce franchising, where in essence you take more control of the network, and certainly in there the mayor and the combined authority would have the power to start consulting on that. But in order for that, the legal test for that is that the network isn't functioning correctly at the moment. So that is actually built into the current devolution proposition. And I think Councillor Clark covered your question around the lobbying to government, as Pete and I sort of intimated, we take every opportunity that there is to bid for all of the funding rounds that come out. And in the past, we've been really successful with all of those.
Chairman, just to come back and just to expand on the lobbying, perhaps it's worth mentioning as well. This is one of the benefits of the leader having a dual function, because next week he has secured a debate in Parliament on public transport in Nottinghamshire. And so the several local MPs will be contributing to that debate as well. So that's just a good example of us escalating the whole issue and making sure that we do actually push for promoting. So I just really want to ensure that the scrutiny committee is aware that we are doing all we can within constraints to really push to improve the services.
Yeah, forgive me, I missed answering one of your questions. So I'm going to hand over to Pete to answer the question about how we work closely with the districts and all. Yeah.
So we've been very lucky. We've always had a very proactive relationship with the districts and boroughs, and that's only become closer with the enhanced partnership work that we've done. We had to develop the bus service improvement plan proposal for government in conjunction with them to show that we had a joined up approach across the upper tier authorities and the lower tier authorities. And when we look to implement some of the bus service improvements, we'll have them as part of the project team that we'll be going to and talking and developing it with them, to obviously, because they can help us deliver those because of their functions that they carry out as well. So we'll build on that and move forward on that. We work very closely with the districts and boroughs through the planning process, so we're very aware of what's coming on downstream, looking to lever in money so we can look at how that could contribute towards the bigger picture. And we've also been working with them on developing their proposals for towns funds, various other funding opportunities where there's a transport element, so that the public transport is at the heart of their proposals or considerations in what they put forward in the future. And within that sort of strand as well, we're going to work with, I think, 1 or 2 districts as well on their travel plans and get them liaising with the bus operators to sort of get good deals for their staff and employees to encourage them to use public transport.
Thank you very much for that. Next, I've got Councillor Ogle.
Thank you very much, Chairman. My question is around the clarity of flexibility of service. The new buses are certainly better for the disabled, and they're being trialled in my area. So where you've got a bus stop, have they got to go to the bus stop to collect the people, or can they go to the street or door of the community people who are demanding this service? And in some cases, services in the past have been abandoned, so we've got small settlements which might be 1 mile or 2 miles away from the bus service. Are these people going to be, well, been deprived in the past, are these people going to be included on the on-demand service, and will they be dropped off back afterwards? I think that is my question.
I'm assuming the question is principally around the on-demand service. Yeah, sure. And I'll ask Gary just to answer some of the detail. But in terms of the point I made earlier about hard to reach communities or remote communities, obviously not every hamlet or village necessarily has an official bus stop if it's not on a recognised bus route already, and so in those circumstances, it might be some sort of recognised landmark, like outside the village hall or outside the church or whatever. So that's where I think some of the flexibility comes in. Pete.
Okay, thank you. So in regard to the service, it's not a door-to-door service. It's a stop-to-stop service. So it's going to be very difficult to do a door-to-door service and be efficient and be able to get down the streets if we were to do that, or as an alternative. And we want to encourage people to connect to the existing bus network. So it's basically stop to stop. We have put in, as Councillor pointed out, we have put in virtual bus stops where we've had feedback, so similar to the Retford example, where we've had feedback of, oh, I didn't realise this was a new service, a possibility of a bus stop being there. So we've set up a virtual bus stop so that we tell them where to go. So that might be the end of the street, but there might not be an official bus stop there at the moment. And we can obviously, if demand warrants it, we can invest in a proper bus stop for those people moving forward. So demand responsive does give us that a little bit flexible with the geographical area it is, because we're encouraging people to make different types of journeys within that area, not just traditional ones you've had for a fixed route. Ossington's a good example of where we put in a virtual bus stop, and we're using the experience from other trials as well to inform this approach that we've done. Luckily, we weren't at the forefront of it, I think, in some respects. We've learned from some of our colleagues in Yorkshire and other parts of the country on how to develop, implement the service. And as we've always said, it's a pilot. So any feedback that is welcome, and we've done a number of changes already, and we will continue to do so with this pilot period.
Very much so. If we can include Fledborough, which is an extended settlement, that would be brilliant. Thank you.
I think it's probably worth also saying, if I may, that we were looking to get together with the local councillors during the trial to get that type of feedback. So we'll organise that as well. But thanks for your feedback, Councillor Ogle.
Thank you very much. Next, I've got Councillor Callaghan.
Sorry. I'm going to ask my questions anyway, although I think you have answered some of them, Neil. But we know bus services have been declining in this county even before COVID. We also know they've not been fit for purpose for a long time. In some areas of Mansfield, and you will know that, Councillor Moxon, and the majority of bus services are run by Stagecoach East Midlands in Mansfield, and they're run on a financial basis without support from the county as well. And I know the county does support, the 141, and we have got the electric buses with Bury Hill, but, in some of our areas, such as Bellamy and Oak Tree, we don't even have a bus service after early evening. But we've also got a lot of people that we need to get back into work. And unfortunately, they haven't got the funding to have cars. So actually, they are reliant on buses. So it would be helpful if we could do that. We know the council don't have the budget to prop up failing bus companies and the whole bus market in general. But like a lot of services in this county, we do need an overhaul of them. And I think you've answered this, Councillor Clark. What are we doing as a council to lobby government? And you've already sort of answered that a little bit, because English counties are facing, a decline in rural bus services. And, like you've said, sometimes it's probably better to put one on every hour than one on every half hour. But it's getting that message out. So it's the chicken and egg. If we don't get enough people on the buses, we won't get the funding. So how do we do it? Thank you.
I think I could use the parliamentary example of, I refer you to the answer I gave a few moments ago. Yes, you're right. I think I've already primarily answered, but you're quite right. It's very easy, and I'm sure as I said earlier, we all have examples of where there have been problems, and I don't think anybody is ever going to claim there haven't been any problems. But I would say that it might not be easily evident, but actually Nottinghamshire has got a much better record on bus services than most others in the country, bearing in mind that some counties don't provide any services at all. So that's all part of the bus review, is to try and ensure we increase that reliability so that a user can be sure that the bus is going to actually turn up. And so that's why it is a significance of that reliability. But primarily as well, as I've already mentioned, about really encouraging people to use the bus services, which is the most significant factor to ensure that we've got seats on bums, if I can put it that way, within the buses rather than in the cars. Sorry, yes, you're right, bums on seats. You see, I just wanted to make sure people were listening, Mr. Chairman, and clearly they were. Anything else to add?
I think as well, in answer to your question, there's a lot of different components to this. So we're thinking about demand responsive travel. Where does that fit in? We're thinking about, obviously, lobbying government has been mentioned. We're thinking about how do we use the bus service improvement plan money, that 18 million that we're likely to get, how do we use that in the best way? Part of that is a under 22 young persons ticket scheme to encourage them onto the network, to put some money into the commercial operators through that, get them used to using the bus, because that makes a difference going forward. So all of those different components in it together can help us to try and get the best services possible for our residents.
Thank you very much for those answers. Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is really interesting, genuinely, and we're learning new things all the time. So well done on the presentation, especially on the demand service, because it's all so new to us. It's the more information we can get on that, the better. I do have a question though about the supported services that we do, and I must just give a big up to one in my part of the world, the 33. It's fantastic, and whenever I promote it as much as I can do, and it's great. But how in general, how do we decide which routes we're going to support? I would imagine there's lots of calculations and data and all the rest of it, but no doubt, because once people get to know there are supported services, people may well say, well, I want a supported service in my area, which is perfectly understandable. So how do we decide that? And also touching on what has also already been mentioned is the general awareness raising and the communication, and how do we do it? Because I think there's still a lot of people out there who will often, and again has been alluded to, will sign petitions demanding more buses, but they never use them when they've got them. So how do we get that the message across, the communication across? And finally, just as one other general point, is we know that COVID did cause a drop in use, and that, which is perfectly understandable, and it's building up again now. But I wonder, because the numbers are still low, could it be that people are still lacking confidence in the experiences they had during COVID and post-COVID with the driver shortages and all the rest of it? So again, I suppose the simple answer to that is communication. Communication is key and all that. So thank you.
All of the above, Chairman, really. Yes, we're still not back to pre-COVID usage, but that's all part and parcel of where we'd really like to up the game in terms of a sales campaign, and that's really where hopefully we can get people's awareness of the services back by, as I said earlier, it's not just issuing press releases, that's marketing. I'm talking about sales and actually pushing the services and selling the services rather than just marketing the services. Over to the more detailed answer about how the assessments are made on the supported services.
Thanks for your questions, Councillor Butler. Just to build on what Councillor Clark said, there have been some studies done recently looking at why people aren't using the bus like they used to, and there is a mix of, as you've alluded to, that confidence to get back on, but also some people have changed their habits in terms of shopping. and that type of thing, and move to getting their supermarket shopping delivered instead of going on the bus. So there's a bit of a mixture. I think there's hope in the sector that those numbers would go up to somewhere around 95% in the end, and that's what the modelling has sort of been based on. And then in terms of how do we determine which routes are supported or not, I'm going to hand over to Pete, because we do have a way forward with this, and there are various factors that we take into account.
Thank you, Gary. So we regularly obviously monitor our contracts as we go along. We get patronage information back, we get operation information to make sure they're running the services so that they're sort of complying with their contract arrangements. What we do then, we tip that data into a system where we continually look at that service, and we take into account a number of factors moving forward. One of them is the index of multiple deprivation. So we look at those socioeconomics of the communities that we serve. We also look at car ownership levels within those communities, because we know some people haven't got a car or access to a car. What the primary journey purpose is. So we have that weighted towards employment, training, going through to some of those essential shopping journeys and leisure journeys. Availability of alternatives. So in some communities, we services that complement them, but there's also other options for people in it. So we take that into account, their proximity to that. And of course, we look at cost per passenger and the number of passengers per journey. And that churns out a number, and then we can sort of look at where it is on the list and see what we need to do to improve that service, or to in future concentrate on making sales campaigns regarding those services to get people to use them.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Upton.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to say I absolutely support a more detailed review of concessionary fares. It's a complicated subject area. A colleague has just mentioned about the time that you can use the concessionary fare. I mean, it's across the whole of England, as I understand it, and I use it a lot. And at the risk of being branded a railway anorak, I mean, can we include rail in this review? Because, for instance, from Radcliffe-on-Trent to Nottingham city centre, 11 minutes cheaper than the bus. Can't use the card I've got, go on the bus. I mean, it doesn't seem logical to me, but I'm sure there's very good reasons why not. A lot of our villages in Nottinghamshire, believe it or not, have village stations. You know, the Robin Hood line, the Nottingham Newark Lincoln line, the Nottingham Grantham line. There must be a couple of dozen village stations. I'd like us to look in the concessionary fare as to why we can or why we cannot roll it out onto trains. Thank you.
I think, Chairman, this is where you can sort of identify and focus into specific outcomes from this meeting of things to be looked at in the future. And so if that was a request from the committee, then that's something that we can include within a review on local transport as opposed to just bus services, because obviously this is where to a certain extent integrated ticketing is something to be an ambition to achieve. Obviously, easy for me to say, more difficult to actually be delivered by all the operators, but it's something where we want. It shows really the good example of where we need to be working with all partners in order to achieve as flexible and as comprehensive local transport service as we possibly can. So I think that's something that can be included in our review.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a worthy ambition, and it's part of what we're looking at through the bus service improvement plan. But and there's a real opportunity there to make improvements. I guess the challenge is trying to orchestrate the partnership arrangements that there are there, you know, with people playing slightly different tunes at slightly different paces, so that the overall sound of it, you know, makes sense to the public, because there's quite a lot of different partnership perspectives to make that work. But again, we can explore that in some more detail if the committee wish.
Well, I think Councillor Clark slightly stole my thunder in terms of I think shortly we're going to get Martin to run down kind of some of the things that have come out of this meeting and potential areas where we might want to potentially set up a task and finish groups and that kind of thing. I've just got a very quick question to ask, if I may. The on-demand bus service, I think, is a brilliant idea. I noticed on the video, when we eventually saw the video, that there was a lot of emphasis on it being sort of ordered by a smartphone, essentially. And I just wondered what help you're giving to elderly people, because my sort of impression was that, and I could be totally wrong, but that it would be primarily aimed at sort of more elderly people using that service, and yet they are probably the ones that are least able to use a smartphone.
I can't remember if it was, I thought it was mentioned in the video, but certainly it's not just on the app. There is a landline you can actually ring up and order the bus service over the phone as well, which very much exactly addresses what you just alluded to, perhaps the more elderly or vulnerable who don't necessarily have access to a computer or phone, whatever. It's important that those are the very people that might end up being isolated in out of the way communities, and they're the very people that need that additional assistance. So yes, very much that landline is available. And I just remembered as well something that Councillor Callaghan mentioned in terms of after early evening in Mansfield, the Knots Bus On Demand is available for evening services in Mansfield.
Excellent. I expect to be seeing you on one of those on-demand buses. And are there any other questions from councillors? Yeah, we have got some. So Councillor Wheeler.
Yes, briefly, I think when so there's an article which we'll go into when Martin says it, but when we come back on buses, I think getting the actual detail on the support we give to these services, the amount we do, and perhaps the figures, how much that's costing per passenger, I said earlier, because I understand it's a very political topic, and there'll be some opposition councillor will come and go in an area, go, get rid of this bus service, and it's going to impact people. Actually, if we have those figures, can show people actually this is what it's costing to subsidise this bus service. There's a better way than on demand. One, does not just help the public understand that, but two, perhaps can sometimes take the politics out to make it actually the decision we need to do. Budgeting matters. We know there's a lot of money we need to save as a budget overall, and it's easier to say we'll cut this and the other, but actually look at ways we can amend it. But having that detail in front of us to properly scrutinise, I think would be really useful.
Yeah, I think that's something that we'll probably have to come back to, Councillor Wheeler, and to a future meeting. But Martin's definitely noted that one down. Sorry, I've got a couple more questions first. Yeah. So Councillor Williamson.
Thank you. I'll thank you for your question to Councillor Clark, because I was just going to ask that, but you beat me to it.
Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I did indicate earlier, but you obviously didn't see me. So that's been answered. So the second question I've got is the real-time bus displays. So recently I've had one resident tell me that a bus driver's told them not to take any notice of them because they don't work. It's just somebody somewhere else pushing a button, and the drivers don't adhere to them at all. That's come from a bus driver. My second experience is I was stood at a bus stop. I wasn't waiting for a bus, but I was talking to somebody who was, and the bus was due in 5 minutes, and then it went down to 2 minutes passed, and then 5 minutes passed, and the bus didn't turn up, and then it went back to 30 minutes. So are the technical issues happening around that? Did they work, or are they just there for show? I don't know. Thank you.
It just shows how friendly our bus drivers are, doesn't it, Chair? From a more technical answer from Pete.
Yes, there has been a number of issues, obviously, around the buses, which we talked about within the presentation, around driver availability and vehicles. So sometimes these vehicles are taken out of service during their operation, and we're just doing some improvements to the system so it's much more customer friendly. So we'll be able to put onto the system in the future that journey's being cancelled. We're doing other further improvements in the system to improve the reliability of some of the information in it. I'm afraid it's just a bit of a consequence of the instability in the network at the moment, why it's not working so well, but it will improve over the next few months, and hopefully the customers have a better experience. The driver was not quite right there in saying, well, what's put into the system, because that data is provided by the bus operators. So it uses that to generate its predictions. So it should be relatively accurate. But as we know, day to day on the network, sometimes things get delayed. So it might hold on 2 minutes for more than 2 minutes. But we thought that was better than keep going up and down. It's better to sort of keep it at that.
Councillor Purdy-Horan, did you still want to ask a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, a lot of my questions have been answered, so thank you for that. But I'm going to perhaps make myself a little bit unpopular.
Please, no.
I've listened to Councillor Clark for 20 years, and he is one of the most articulate, safe pair of hands that anyone could have to head a team.
Could I have that in writing,
and for that,
please, Chairman?
For that, I congratulate him. But Ambition 8 includes improving transport. What is his view on how that's going? And I put to him that perhaps we're being a little bit complacent, because the truth is, in my view, we have a bus crisis, and that doesn't sort of come across this morning. And what are we doing to assist? There are, I don't know if anybody else watches Make Me Prime Minister on Channel 4 on Tuesdays, but there's a crisis every day, and I have no doubt that Councillor Clark and his team are facing many challenges every day. But my question is, we put in a joint bid, I think, with Nottingham City Council for 98 million, and I think, was it 30 million that the government gave? So presumably that's shared between the county and the city. Is that a success? I'm absolutely sure that really nobody thought that they would get 100% of the bid, but to get nearly just 30% of it, is that considered a success? And the challenges going forward, I've given up passing on messages because from residents who have rang me up, and I'm sure others have received similar phone calls where people are complaining that, especially in the villages, that they have missed hospital appointments because our own systems, the real-time displays, as Councillor Williamson alluded to, are giving wrong information. And it's nobody's fault, because the companies are only communicating at the moment with a TikTok generation. Trent Barton giving last-minute cancellations on Twitter. My mother doesn't even know what a tweet is. I can't explain it to her. And Stagecoach putting it on their website at the last minute. And I'm sure we all know that there are challenges with recruiting drivers in that industry, and it seems there is tremendous competition with the driving and the driving industry generally, with other lorry firms and deliveries. So my question there is there anything that we have thought we could do in improving our real-time information on those information screens, because I believe they are our property, our service. And also, is there a way, as a major investor, stakeholder in the services that are provided by those two large companies, is there any way that we can assist them in promoting the opportunities within their industry? Is there more that we can do, given that we all recognise that, you know, there is massive challenges to promoting public transport? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
First of all, in terms of the general point about Ambition 8 improving public transport, I think we've already demonstrated from answers from the team how much we are already doing to achieve that, and we've also demonstrated how much our ambitions are to still improve further, bearing in mind, as I said earlier, there are some counties that don't offer any bus services at all around the country. In terms of the funding, then yeah, again, there are some areas that haven't received any funding, whereas we have, and I shall ask Gary to give some detail on that. But in terms of the displays and the reliability, again, that's something that can be brought out in the bus service review, which is now taking place, to ensure that we do work with not only the services that we operate, but also with the other commercial operators. And we're already, I mean, the conversations take place with the commercial operators daily on various aspects of the services. But that doesn't mean to say that that can't always be improved. There's always room for improvement in some area or another. But it's important that we continue to keep working together to ensure that those improvements in Ambition 8 do take place. Gary.
Yeah, I think in terms of the success with the bidding, I think we were one of 17 local transport authorities that were successful in getting that government funding and putting a really strong and ambitious bid in. So there'll be a number of others that didn't. And in terms of just to pick up on the point around encouraging the bus companies, as Councillor Clark alluded to, we're in regular communication with them, and we do know that they are really working hard to get new drivers in and do that training, and so that there's starting to be signs that they're getting on top of that. What's happened is they've lost some people of sort of retirement age who've reflected about work-life balance during COVID, and there's also, as you perhaps aware, competition amongst other sectors for those drivers, but they've invested actually quite a lot of money in training, and we're starting to see that come through. And it might be something that the committee might wish to think about in terms of whether they wanted an operator's perspective as part of the conversation here at any point.
Just to add, Chairman, and Councillor Purdy-Horan asked about what are we doing, etc. I have had meetings with both the MDs of both Trent Barton and the Stagecoach in recent months, discussing the services, and we actually asked the question, how can we help each other? So those discussions are taking place, and Gary's just mentioned, I was going to mention it or suggest it a bit later, but he's just mentioned it now, and maybe with the outcomes, when you come to look at some of these things, you may want to, or a task and finish group, you may want to invite at least one of the operators to actually come and discuss their services with the committee. If perhaps I could just put in a plea, scrutiny always works better if it's a discussion rather than demanding that or subpoenaing them to come before you to be grilled. I think it's better to operate as a discussion as to how we can all work better together.
All right, thank you very much, Councillor Clark. Got two more questions, I think. Councillor Gowland.
Thanks. I want to pick up on Councillor Wheeler's point as the whining opposition member who would be, you didn't use the word whining, I admit, complaining. Of course, these balancings are not simply cost versus profit. As you said, it's the environment. Of course, I agree it's the environment. It's cars off the streets. The longer I'm a councillor, the more I realise how much cars impact on people. It's supporting vulnerable people who have no other options. But it's also, I hate to tell you, growth, because there are people who can't get to work without cars. There are shopping centres that rely on cars. There are people who we need, these key workers who we are short of now, who we don't pay enough and who have no opportunities. So it's not as simple as it costs this much to run this bus service. Whoops, we can't afford it. It has a much bigger support to obviously depending on the bus service, a much bigger investment in the community. And so that's one of the reasons why we need to have central government support, because it has a central government impact. And of course, also, quite obviously, if you don't have nice buses, people won't use them. If you don't have a regular bus service, people won't use them. So it's also, you have to actually invest in that bus service. But I just had to come back on that. Thank you.
Just very quickly, Chairman, I absolutely agree with you. And yes, growth is an important part, and all these factors need to be borne in mind when we're looking at the challenges involved. And yes, you're quite right. If we want to encourage people back to work and to encourage more growth, we need to be providing those services. And that's why it's important that we campaign to ensure that people are A, aware of the services, but B, we then push for them to actually use those bus services. So I think we're all agreeing with each other in different ways. That's the reason why we want A, to support the government's ambition for growth, but B, then also that's why we're lobbying them to support us in delivering the improved bus services.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Butler.
Thank you. Very briefly, just going back to the on-demand service and the marketing and selling of it, and also really picking up on the point you made about the likely or probable target market being people who don't use smartphones. I'm sure you'll have it in hand, but when it comes to doing the selling and promoting, don't just sell it digitally. You need to sell it in good old-fashioned, I don't know, leaflets, whatever, because otherwise the very people who will benefit from this and will use it won't see the great service that it can be. But I'm sure you have it under control anyway. And if not, well, you know now. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Butler. If there's nothing else from people, I'm going to ask Martin, yeah, definitely not Peter, as you were called the other day, to give a quick summary of what's been discussed.
Okay, so in learn a little bit of a random order, but here we go. So firstly, that the report be noted. Secondly, that member-led review be carried out on the council's concessionary travel scheme by members of the Place Select Committee. That once available, that full performance data on all aspects of the on-demand bus service be circulated to members of the Place Select Committee. Fourthly, that members of the Place Select Committee be given the opportunity to feed into the processes surrounding the bus services review. Fifthly, that once available, details of the promotional campaign to encourage bus use be circulated to members of the Place Committee. Sixthly, that information on the council's policy providing school transport for looked after children be circulated to members of the committee. And finally, that a report be brought to a future meeting of the Place Select Committee on the subsidies provided to support the delivery of bus services in Nottinghamshire.
So I thought that summarised pretty much what we came from our discussions today. Has anybody got any dissension to that and wants to add anything or thinks that wasn't part of it? Councillor Callaghan?
Yeah, it was just that, it said that the work programme stated that we would receive, a progress report. Obviously, this is the first one. So, but like the presentation, if we could have had sight of it before, so we could have had a look at it a little bit more, and then brought some questions out from that rather than sitting in this meeting and doing that. So you've got time to process it a bit more.
I think that's a very good point, and I think I'm sure you appreciate, like all of us do, that it's sort of it's a bit of a fluid sort of process that we've got. It's very new, so we're sort of a little bit trying to find our feet a bit. I think you make some good points, and I think that's probably something that we can improve on in future meetings. But go on.
Chairman, just to clarify, the slides were still being finalised. Well, I was going to, not literally this morning, but until recently. So you know, there's always changes and amendments being made.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Councillor Gowland.
Same point, really. You know, I'm fully aware of making some changes to the slides, and it would be fine to have changes made to the slides. I think actually it would be good to have a written report, to be honest, in the way we used to operate. And I appreciate that's more work. I'm sorry, I can see, but it's easier to, you know, understand what's going on, and we can then bring questions to you even in advance, to be honest, rather than dropping on you today. Thank you.
Yeah, again, I reiterate what I said before in response to Councillor Callaghan. I think this is a sort of a new process, and not wanting to belittle in any way the subject matter today, but this was thought to be sort of a bit of a more gentle sort of run into the whole scrutiny process, and for us, so that we could iron out some of these issues. So I think that's, you know, the really well made points that we probably need to do something about in the future. Derek.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just to pick up on those points, certainly we can ensure that now that we've delivered that initial presentation, and we will endeavour to ensure that you've got that detail sent out with the papers in future. When we do few presentations to this committee in future, we'll endeavour to get them cleared and completed and signed off in time to be circulated with the papers, because I completely understand your desire to see them earlier. And we're in a place, I think, now where we can start to provide much more detail in subsequent reports. I think the challenge for us this time was it's such a broad topic. It would have been difficult to kind of encapsulate everything that we've presented this morning in a single report. It would have been a little bit War and Peace like, I think. So, but I think we can we're now in a space where we can provide a bit more detail.
Thank you very much for that, Derek. So with that then, as Martin's already given out sort of a list of actions from today, then I will formally move that. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Ogle, I just saw you first, so that can be noted. All those in favour of those actions? I think that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Okay, so then we move next on to item number 5, which is the work programme. Just before we do that, I just wanted to remind members that there is next Wednesday, isn't it? Next Wednesday, we've got a visit to the materials recovery site in Mansfield. So a quick reminder, so those people that are members of the committee that haven't yet responded to Martin, whether you can go or not, that would be appreciated if you could do that to him either after this meeting or by email afterwards. So that was just a quick reminder while that entered my head. But moving on to the work programme, I'll hand over to Martin, please.
Yeah, so just quickly, obviously the work programme was developed after the meeting in July, and then conversations with the sharing officers afterwards, and was approved on the 7th of September by overview. Other items can be added throughout the year, so if there's anything you'd like considered, so let myself and the chair know, and then we can have conversations with officers, and then obviously it's down to the chair of overview whether it gets added to the work programme or not. And then just a reminder, which probably some of you have heard, might be your third time for some of you, just always be looking at the forward plan every time it's published. I know Keith has just sent out a new revised version today, so just have a look at that. And if there's anything that you think you'd like to be involved with, again, just let myself and the chair know.
Thank you very much for that, Martin. So yes, next on the work programme We are due to be talking about highways and road safety, the household waste recycling centres. So next week's visit will be really useful in terms of talking about that. And then the response to the flooding in Worksop, which happened a couple of months ago. So we'll look forward to having Councillor Clark back at the next meeting as well.
Very kind of you, Chairman. I look forward to it.
Do any members have comments on the work programme? We've already got one hand up, Councillor Gowland.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the comment from Derek about this item, you know, being too big. And I just wonder whether highways and road safety falls into the same category of being too big, to actually genuinely get down to the details, and whether it should be split. Because there's the highways review and there's road safety, and I think just by taking those two items might be easier. And I think also the following month, climate change probably comes under the same category of too big.
Derek.
Thank you. I certainly agree, Councillor Gowland, about climate change is difficult to encapsulate in a single report. I think it's slightly different as far as highways and road safety is concerned because of, as you mentioned, the long-standing piece of work that's been underway and that you've been part of, the members' review panel for the highways review, which is latterly encapsulated or incorporated rather road safety matters as well. So I think our current thinking is that we'll be able to present to committee a summary of all of the work that the panel has undertaken and of the work that's subsequently been undertaken by officers and by VIA to deliver improvements in both highways maintenance arrangements and road safety arrangements. So at the moment, I think we are in a place where we can contemplate and pulling all of that together in a single, fairly detailed report for the committee to consider.
Thank you for that, Derek. Yeah, and I think in response to your comments, Councillor Gowland, I'll discuss it with Martin, and we'll talk about whether that is potentially sort of too much to discuss, particularly with the other items on the agenda, and we'll get back to everyone and whether it needs an extra meeting or whether it needs rejigging. I think we've always said that this is a sort of a fairly fluid work programme going forward, and if something sort of required more time or less time or was less important, things could move around. So I think you raise a very good point, and I'll discuss it with Martin afterwards, and we'll come to some conclusion on that one, if that's all right. Are there any other comments on the work programme going forward? No. Okay, well, with that then, I will close the meeting. Thanks everyone for your attendance today. Thank you to Derek and your team, and to Councillor Clark for attending. And I wish you all a safe journey home. Thank you very much.